Hermann Hesse Demian. Good that you ask, you should always ask, always have doubts. I realize today that nothing in the world is more distasteful to a man than to take the path that leads to himself. You should never be afraid of people. Such fear can destroy us completely. You've simply got to get rid of it, if you want to turn into someone decent. You understand that, don't you? The things we see are the same things that are within us. There is no reality except the one contained within us. That is why so many people live such an unreal life. They take the images outside them for reality and never allow the world within to assert itself. She stood before him and surrendered herself to him, and sky, forest, and brook all came toward him in new and resplendent colors, belonged to him, and spoke to him in his own language. And instead of merely winning a woman, he embraced the entire world, and every star in heaven glowed within him and sparkled with joy in his soul. He had loved and had found himself. But most people love to lose themselves. I am fond of music, I think, because it is so amoral. Everything else is moral and I am after something that isn't. I have always found moralizing intolerable. We who bore the mark might well be considered by the rest of the world as strange, even as insane and dangerous. We had awoken, or were awakening, and we were striving for an ever-perfect state of wakefulness, whereas the ambition and quest for happiness of the others consisted of linking their opinions, ideals, and duties, their life and happiness, ever more closely with those of the herd. They, too, strove, they, too showed signs of strength and greatness. But as we saw it, whereas we marked men represented nature's determination to create something new, individual, and forward-looking, the others lived in the determination to stay the same. For the mankind which they loved as much as we did was a fully formed entity that had to be preserved and protected. For us, mankind was a distant future toward which we were all journeying, whose aspect no one knew, whose laws weren't written down anywhere. For the first time in my life I tasted death, and death tasted bitter, for death is birth, is fear and dread of some terrible renewal. An enlightened man had but one duty, to seek the way to himself, to reach inner certainty, to grope his way forward, no matter where it led. Each of us has to find out for himself what is permitted and what is forbidden. Forbidden for him. It's possible for one never to transgress a single law and still be a bastard. And vice versa. You knew all along that your sanctioned world was only half the world, and you tried to suppress the other half the same way the priests and teachers do. You won't succeed. No one succeeds in this once he has begun to think. Our God's name is Abraxas, and he is God and Satan, and he contains both the luminous and the dark world.
Everybody getting cream, no one considered the leech. Think about it now, that's damn near 1.5. I kill them all, I'll be set for life.
Everyone goes through this crisis. For the average person, this is the point when the demands of his own life come into the sharpest conflict with his environment, when the way forward has to be sought with the bitterest means at his command. Many people experience the dying and rebirth, which is our fate, only this once during their entire life. Their childhood becomes hollow and gradually collapses, everything they love abandons them, and they suddenly feel surrounded by the loneliness and mortal cold of the universe. Very many are caught forever in this impasse, and for the rest of their lives cling painfully to an irrevocable past, the dream of the lost paradise, which is the worst and most ruthless of dreams. If you need something desperately and find it, this is not an accident, your own craving and compulsion leads you to it. We consist of everything the world consists of, each of us, and just as our body contains the genealogical table of evolution as far back as the fish and even much further, so we bear everything in our soul that once was alive in the soul of men. Every god and devil that ever existed, be it among the Greeks, Chinese, or Zulus, are within us, exist as latent possibilities, as wishes, as alternatives. If the human race were to vanish from the face of the earth save for one halfway talented child that had received no education, this child would rediscover the entire course of evolution. It would be capable of producing everything once more, gods and demons, paradises, commandments, the Old and New Testament. I realized that some people will not believe that a child of little more than 10 years is capable of having such feelings. My story is not intended for them. I am telling it to those who have a better knowledge of man. The adult who has learned to translate a part of his feelings into thoughts notices the absence of these thoughts in a child, and therefore comes to believe that the child lacks these experiences, too. Yet rarely in my life have I felt and suffered as deeply as at that time. At one time I had given much thought to why men were so very rarely capable of living for an ideal. Now I saw that many, no, all men were capable of dying for one. If you hate a person, you hate something in him that is part of yourself. What isn't part of ourselves doesn't disturb us. I have been and still am a seeker, but I have ceased to question stars and books. I have begun to listen to the teaching my blood whispers to me. I live in my dreams, that's what you sense. Other people live in dreams, but not in their own. That's the difference. Love must not entreat, she added, or demand. Love must have the strength to become certain within itself. Then it ceases merely to be attracted and begins to attract. The bird fights its way out of the egg. The egg is the world. Who would be born must first destroy a world. The bird flies to God. That God's name is Abraxas. Every man is more than just himself, he also represents the unique, the very special and always significant and remarkable point at which the world's phenomena intersect, only once in this way, and never again. That is why every man's story is important, eternal, sacred. That is why every man, as long as he lives and fulfills the will of nature, is wondrous, and worthy of consideration. In each individual the spirit has become flesh, in each man the creation suffers, within each one a redeemer is nailed to the cross. One never reaches home, she said. But where paths that have an affinity for each other intersect, the whole world looks like home, for a time. I have no right to call myself one who knows. I was one who seeks, and I still am, but I no longer seek in the stars or in books. I'm beginning to hear the teachings of my blood pulsing within me. My story isn't pleasant, it's not sweet and harmonious like the invented stories, it tastes of folly and bewilderment, of madness and dream, like the life of all people who no longer want to lie to themselves. Those who are too lazy and comfortable to think for themselves and be their own judges obey the laws. Others sense their own laws within them. Gaze into the fire, into the clouds, and as soon as the inner voices begin to speak, surrender to them. Don't ask first whether it's permitted, or would please your teachers or father or some god. You will ruin yourself if you do that. I wanted only to live in accord with the promptings which came from my true self. Why was that so very difficult? You've never lived what you are thinking, and that isn't good. Only the ideas we actually live are of any value.
Now, listen to me. Listen to me. Right the fuck now. That is the basis of the blues.
Niggas is mad, I get more butt than ashtrays. Fuck's a fair one, I get mine the fast way. Ski mask way, nigga ransom notes. Far from handsome, but damn a nigga tote. More guns than roses, foes shaking in their boots. A visible bully, like the boots, disappear, vamoose, you whack to me. Take them rhymes back to the factory. I see the gimmicks, the whack lyrics, the shit is depressing. Please forget it. You're mad cause my style you're admiring. Don't be mad, this is hiring. You should have been the cop, fuck hip-hop. With that freestyle, you're bound to get shot. Not from Houston, but I rap a lot. Pack the gap a lot. The flames about to drop.
Here comes a brand new flavor in your head.